Good morning and welcome to then your first lecture on the third expedition of Captain James Cook. Thank you to the technical team for providing the special effects. So what I'm planning to do today then is to go through a general view of the aims and the significance of the third expedition, which, as I'm sure you'll remember, was dedicated to discovering the Northwest Passage. And then, as I did with the second expedition, I will go on to talk about particular incidents throughout the expedition and what they can teach us about its importance. So the goal assigned to James Cook's third expedition, 1776 to 80, although of course he was no longer around by the end, the goal assigned by the Admiralty was the discovery of the fabled Northwest Passage between the Atlantic and the Pacific, whose existence had first been speculated about in 1576, so 200 years earlier, by Sir Humphrey Gilbert. And indeed, his voyage does turn out to be useful in that it contributes to proving that the passage does not exist, even though Cook himself refused to admit it. Although this Northwest Passage would have been extremely profitable, it was not the only aim of the third expedition. It was also to explore and map out for the British Empire the western seaboard of North America with an eye to what was possible in terms of trade, commerce, and even colonization. Now, it's worth underlining that the fur trade was a major commercial interest at this time. Most of it in North America, for the English North America, was run by the Hudson Bay Company, which was also the de facto government of sections of Anglophone North America for almost 200 years. Along the same colonial model as in India, where the East Indies Company served as a government. Indeed, the East Indies Company had its own money, which it could print its own money. It had its own army, etc. This was a particular model of colonial intervention. So let's have a look a little closer at this idea of the search for the Northwest Passage. You need to remember that at this time, of course, it is tremendously easier to travel by sea than the same distance over land. Because of the lack of roads, railways, and so on. And therefore, if it was possible to go from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean, on your way from Europe to trade with China, India, Indonesia, I think, I'm not quite sure where those places are, then it would be tremendously cheaper than going all the way around Africa. Africa being even bigger than it appears to be on our Mercator projection maps. So the search for the Northwest Passage goes right back to the 16th century. Explorers like Frobisher, but even before that, exploration had gone on in this area. Norwegian Vikings went as far as the Americas between the 13th and 14th century, I think. So there was a great desire to establish a route between the two oceans, which they called the Northwest Passage. At first, they thought it might be possible to find a route through the heart of the continent, but then as this appeared as an exploration of North America developed, it appears to be impossible. The attention turned to the possibility of a passage through northern waters. It has to be said that the understanding of the science of the cold in the north was not complete. Many people believed that seawater could not freeze, for example, and so they tended to believe that an open water route close to the North Pole must exist. And although Cook didn't find this passage, many people continued to believe that it was possible, and there were going to be more expeditions later on. The most famous one, perhaps, being that of Sir John Franklin in 1845, which ended rather tragically. And indeed, the end of the story came when the Norwegian explorer Roald Amundsen did successfully get across from Greenland to Alaska in a boat, but these are fortified boats which can deal with a huge amount of ice. So, in fact, the answer is not that there is no passage at all, but there is no practicable passage for shipping between the two oceans. So that's where Cook was at the beginning of his third voyage. That's what he had in mind, and I'll go on to the instructions in a moment. Another of the aims, apart from finding the Northwest Passage, was to take Omai back home. Omai then being a Tahitian dignitary who had come to Britain on the previous voyage. So, where was Cook at the end of the second voyage? When he returned home in 1775, he was offered the opportunity to retire, although it was described as an active retirement. And there are questions asked as whether this was really suitable to Cook's temperament, or whether he was really capable of retiring and not setting off again. At this time, there's also a conflict going on between Cook himself and the two naturalists who had travelled with him on the second voyage, that is Johann Reinhold Foster and his son George, and this is part of the conflict which we come across when we look at the history of the publication, the history of the book, because Johann Reinhold Foster had hoped to get authorization to publish an account of the second expedition. However, it had been dealt with in a way that he was obliged to sign away the rights to do this. However, with his son and they found a loophole, and that was that, if I remember correctly, the son, George Foster, was not old enough to sign this agreement when it was made up previously, and therefore George Foster was not held to this, and he himself went ahead and published his book, A Voyage Around the World, largely based on his father's journals. And as a result of this book, George Foster was admitted to the Royal Society at the age of 22, so a very young member of the Royal Society, and he became to be considered as one of the founders of modern scientific travel literature. Again, he had some pretensions as a writer, and you'll see that his account was speckled with plenty of literary references. Cook himself, after the second expedition, was preparing his own journal for publication because he had been so unhappy with the Hawkesworth version, which indeed has become since quite unpopular with supporters of Cook. Whereas it may be considered that Hawkesworth's literary talent made for a readable account of these amazing journeys. This time then, for the second expedition, the publication around the second expedition, it had been decided by the Admiralty that there would be 2 volumes, the first one based on Cook's journal, and the second a more natural historical volume based on the scientific observations of the Forsters. And they chose John Douglas to help Cook writing up his journal into a publishable form. this discussion about what to publish and who should publish and how should it be published also involved considerations as to what they wanted to be shown to the public. In particular, there was a desire from the point of view of Cook not to have too explicit descriptions of the different sexual customs that they had come across in the local peoples, because there was a tremendous fear of encouraging immorality in the as it was seen in Europe. Now, the fact that it was considered it had been decided to do 2 volumes shows the importance of the scientific result of the expedition, and indeed whether it be the first or the second expedition, the entire world of botanists and natural historians in Europe was transformed by the specimens and drawings brought back from Cook's expeditions. So that was the about the plans to publish on the second voyage. So if we look at the idea of the third expedition, already as soon as Cook was back, the Admiralty began planning another 2-ship voyage, this time to the North Pacific in search of the Northwest Sea Lane between oceans. And this was, again, as we're unsurprised to hear, in the context of colonial competition with other powers. And in particular, there had been recently a book published in translation in Britain, an account of the New Northern Archipelago lately discovered by the Russians in the Sea of Kamchatka. This was written by the Russian secretary to the Imperial Academy of Sciences in St. Petersburg, and it was published in English in 1774. And so this was, the Russians had made tremendous discoveries up there, and so it was obviously of interest to the British Admiralty to have somebody go up there and see what was to be had. In the Russian book, the potentialities of a fur trade in the group of newly discovered islands are discussed. And I think I already mentioned that fur is extremely valuable in a world without central heating and without artificial fabrics which keep us warm. Animal fur was really big money here. So the Russian side, yes. Yeah, we should note then the ideas of the Russians in this book, where they compare their success in the North Pacific with the British success with Cook's expeditions in the South Pacific. Yeah, they're keen to show that they are just as sharp. And it's very fascinating to note that who paid for the publication of the translation of the Russian account? Well, it was paid for by subscription, as it often is, which is a way of promising you will buy the book when it's published. And these books are expensive. They're not for ordinary people to buy, of course. They're expensive to make, and they cost a lot of money. And who was it who subscribed to finance the publication of the translation of the Russian account? Well, quite a number of members of the elite, including Joseph Banks, William Dalrymple, then the explorer Daniel Solander, the other natural historian who had been on the first expedition, and the president of the Royal Society. So you can see that we're in a circle, or a scientific circle, where interest for the North Pacific is very active, and in elite circles in general, the idea of making sure that Britain has a foothold in there, and that it's not all left to the Russians, is probably present. So although Cook was retired at this point, he has not yet been chosen to lead this expedition. He was consulted, and he advised on the fitting out of the 2 ships, Resolution and Discovery. And note the names again. He was by now a very well-known member of the social elite, dining with Palliser and Lord Sandwich, and he was. It was decided then that he would be appointed commander of the expedition. So once all this had been decided, of course, Cook has his instructions. They're not exactly the same as the first and those are the first and second expeditions. So I'm going to have a look at them in a little detail now. I'm going to quote you extracts from the instructions for the third voyages, the third voyage here. They are again marked as secret instructions, although I'm not clear as exactly how secret these were. Quoting from the instructions now, whereas the Earl of Sandwich has signified to us His Majesty's pleasure that an attempt should be made to find out a northern passage by sea from the Pacific to the Atlantic Ocean, we have thought fit to entrust you with the conduct of the present intended voyage, and with that view appointed you to command the first mentioned sloop, and directed Captain Clark, who commands the other, to follow your orders. So where do they want Cook and the ships to go? On your arrival at the Cape of Good Hope, South Africa, you are to refresh the sloop's companies and to cause the sloops to be supplied with as much provisions and water as they may conveniently stow. You are, if possible, to leave the Cape of Good Hope by the end of October or the beginning of November, and proceed to the southward in search of some islands that have lately been seen by the French in the latitude of 48 south. You are not, however, to spend too much time in looking out for those islands or in the examination of them if found, but you are then to proceed to Otaheite, or the Society Islands, Tahiti, before you prosecute the farther object of these instructions. So I'll quoting a little bit more of the instructions a little later on. Upon your arrival at Otaheite, you are to land Omaya at such of them as he may choose, and to leave him there. You are to distribute among the chiefs of those islands such part of the presents with which you have been supplied as you shall judge proper, reserving the remainder to distribute among the natives of the countries you may discover in the southern hemisphere. And then you are to proceed in as direct a course as you can to the coast of New Albion. New Albion was a place that the English laid claim to, which is today in California. Taking care, quoting again, taking care in your way thither not to lose any time in the search of new lands, and you are also strictly enjoined not to touch upon any part of the Spanish dominions on the western continent of America. And if, in your further progress to the northward, you find any subjects of any European prince or state upon any part of the coast you may think proper to visit, you are not to disturb them, or give them any just cause of offence, but on the contrary, to treat them with civility and friendship. So we can see from this part of the instructions the tension between the different European powers and a desire to avoid any diplomatic incident, because war was always in the air, if you wish. Continuing quoting further on in the instructions, I'm only going to quote about a third of the instructions altogether. They're quite long. Then proceed northward along the coast as far as the latitude of 65 degrees, taking care not to lose any time in exploring rivers or inlets, or upon any other account, until you get into the before-mentioned latitude of 65 degrees, where we would wish you to arrive in the month of June next. So this is, don't hang around until you get up as far as 65 degrees. Now, if I remember correctly, and I think I do, this is because they knew the coastline on the other side of America, on the east, is that they knew that below that latitude, is this above or below? But until that latitude anyway, there was no passage across the continent to be had, because they explored it from the other side, if you like. Continuing to quote, when you get that length, you are very carefully to search for and explore such rivers or inlets as may appear to be of considerable extent, and pointing towards Hudson's or Baffin's bays, and if from your own observations or from any information you may receive from the natives, there shall appear to be a certainty or even a probability of a water passage into the aforementioned bays, you are in such a case to use your utmost endeavours to pass through them with one or both of the sloops. Unquote. The instructions here go on to say that if it seems that smaller boats would have more chance of success, then these smaller boats which they carried should be sent with instructions to come back with the information. So they really don't know where they're going. They're hoping there will be some passage big enough to take the ships through, but they might be interested even in a passage which had to be traversed by smaller vessels. The instructions go on to tell Cook what to do the following year. The following year you are, so far as your time will allow, very carefully to observe the true situation of such places, both in latitude and longitude, the variation of the needle, the bearings of the headlands, the height, direction and course of the tides and currents, the depths and sounding of the sea, the shoals, rocks and so on, and also you are to survey, make charts and take views of such bays, harbours and different parts of the coasts, and to make such notations thereon as may be useful either to navigation or commerce. So here again we're in a similar situation from the second exhibition. The first and most valuable thing the British Empire wants is information. If you know how good the harbours are, how many people live there, what they could possibly sell to you, then you've got a head start over the competing colonial countries. Quotes, you are also carefully to observe the nature of the soil and the produce thereof, the animals and fowls that inhabit or frequent it, the fishes that are to be found in the rivers or upon the coast, and in what plenty, and in case there are any peculiar to such places, you are to describe them as minutely and to make as accurate drawings of them as you can. And if you find any metals, minerals, or valuable stones, or any extraneous fossils, you are to bring home specimens of each, as also of the seeds of such trees, shrubs, plants, fruits, and grains peculiar to those places as you may be able to collect, and to transmit them to our secretary, that proper examination and experiments may be made of them. Here you get a little impression of the attitude of the Admiralty. This expedition costs a lot of money, and they want him to bring back the maximum of information, samples, and so on, even though they may not always be exactly sure what they're going to do with it. And indeed, many of the botanical samples were only properly categorized and studied several decades later. What about the first peoples? What about the First Nations, the local peoples they're going to come across? Here we have instructions which seem to be quite similar to the ones we had in the previous expeditions. You are likewise to observe the genius, temper, disposition and number of the natives and inhabitants, where you find any, and to endeavour by all proper means to cultivate a friendship with them, making them presents of such trinkets as you may have on board, as they may like best, inviting them to traffic, and shewing them every kind of civility and regard, but taking care nevertheless not to suffer yourself to be surprised by them, but to be always on your guard against any accidents. So here we have again this particular view of friendship, which is to be cemented by the passing out of trinkets. Yeah, I think that's fairly clear that there's no question of mutually beneficial trade. And as we are very absolutely not surprised to see that this also involves taking possession of lands. You are also, with the consent of the natives, to take possession, in the name of the King of Great Britain, of convenient situations in such countries as you may discover that have not already been discovered or visited by any other European power. But if you find countries so discovered are uninhabited, you are to take possession of them for His Majesty by setting up proper marks and inscriptions as first discoverers and possessors. So it seems that the only thing that will stop them taking a particular place is if they have already been taken by another European power. It is explained in the instructions that after having managed all this, the ships must come back to England and dock at Spitfire, quote, taking care before you leave the sloop to demand from the officers and petty officers the logbooks and journals they may have kept, and to seal them up for inspection, and enjoining them and the whole crew not to divulge where they have been until they shall have permission to do so. So where we are by this time used to this kind of thing. Now at this time, the American revolt had begun in 1775, and of course we're very shortly going to see the American Declaration of Independence. But both France and America had issued instructions to their fleets to protect Captain Cook's expedition, that it had a certain respect. Now, who else was on board, along with Cook and the crew, of course, to make sure that the sails were up and the ships moved, and the Marines, who were there to protect against mutiny and also to deal with any difficulties dominating the local peoples. But I think perhaps it shouldn't be underestimated how important the Marines would be to protect against mutiny, because when you're dealing with local peoples who don't have firearms, perhaps you wouldn't need very many. And yet, I think it's about 10% of the crew who are Marines, armed Marines. But of course, that's not the only side of Cook's expedition. As was now usual, on board there was an official artist. We always have to, of course we know that they didn't have cameras, but we have to keep in mind what that meant, not having cameras. It meant the artist was an extremely important member of the crew, not just for the interesting animals and plants that they might draw for scientific purposes, but also that they would be able to draw the shape of the bay, the maps. Of course, the maps have to be drawn by people who know how to draw maps, and so these are very important. And on board was the official artist John Webber, who would minutely document the voyage in drawings and later paintings and engravings that he would make from his drawings later on. And indeed, some of these are absolutely fascinating, and I'll have to find some way of sending you some pictures or putting some pictures up on the blog. I'm sure my team of technicians will come up with something. And these were important. There's quite a number of them were drawings of local peoples. And the image that was given of them was very influential in the following years, including the development of the image of the, open quotes, noble savage, close quotes. There was a botanist with them. David Nelson was the botanist. He was working on behalf of Kew Gardens, which still today is an extremely important centre for botany in Britain. There was also a naturalist, William Anderson, and an astronomer, William Bailey, and the hydrographer, and I'm pretty sure that I'm right in thinking that hydrographer is dealing with how deep the sea is in different parts around the coast. Of course, very important thing to know. It was William Bligh, who will become, who is still famous today, but for another reason, and that is that later on he will be the leader of an expedition to Tahiti on the Bounty. He will be attacked by mutineers, that his crew will revolt against him despite the dangers involved in doing such a thing, and he will be very lucky in that he will be not killed but sent off in a boat and will successfully reach home, send out an expedition to try to find the mutineers to punish them, and will go on to be an important member of the Australian colonial elite. And indeed, if you're lucky enough to go to Sydney, you will find a statue of William Bligh not far from the Maritime Museum. Now, the number of scientists was fewer than in the previous voyages, and it's not quite clear why this was, but it has been argued that Cook had previously had difficulties with the scientists on his ships, and that this is one of the reasons. One other person should be mentioned among the crew is George Vancouver. He was a midshipman on the Discovery, on the ship, the Discovery, and he would later lead a voyage of exploration in the Northwest Pacific in 1790, and indeed the region of Vancouver is named after him. This is in the Northwest, I think. And that's I'm going to stop there with those general reflections on the aims and significance of the third voyage. But there will be more. There will be much more in a day or two's time. Thank you.